faculty list included only active faculty members for that year. So that is an issue. That's something that will, so for each SDG iteration that we do this analysis for, the staff department list will be updated, but we've chosen to only include faculty members on that list who are active at that time. And I manage those. I don't manage the reports. Those reports are sent to me.
Yes, but to have that integration, the ability to make that connection is, that shows institutional cooperation there, which is great. And so just to talk about this a little bit further about the continuity between years in terms of the queries, because I, just like Laura was saying, I use the Elsevier queries as they're given in Mendeley, and thankfully Elsevier has provided that list of set queries that we can all use, so that our results are comparable from one university to the next. Otherwise, we'd all just be making up as we go along, and nothing would be comparable. Now, it's funny. I was just on a call this morning with Duncan Ross, who is the head honcho at THE, who leads the UN SDG report, and he showed me what the queries are going to look like for 2021, and apparently they're changing. So the queries that we used, Laura and I used last year, won't be valid in the future. The THE or Elsevier has expanded the queries, and he just gave a snapshot of one of them, and the query is over 100 pages long. So it's a vast query, and he pointed out that it's so complex we probably won't be able to run it as bibliometricians. We won't be able to run it, in Scopus or in SciVal. It'll crash the machine. So
yeah, I've had. That is problematic.
So I don't. This is not really a question. I'm just wondering, what role is then left for us as bibliometricians at university if we can't run those queries and generate those data sets. Well then, I guess we just have to trust THE to give us the right answer. I'm not really sure how this rolls out.
Yeah, and if they're coming back to us and asking us to validate data like QS is doing, but we can't do it. I know a lot of people are feeling that pain right now. It makes it impossible for us to do that. But yeah, I encounter that already with some of the queries that we run on quantum science. And if Shannon's on the call, she probably knows this challenge too. If you get past, I don't even know what the number is, but it's probably something like around 300 to 500 terms in your advanced search, it just stops talking to you. And then maybe this is something that we can bring up with Elsevier, right? Because if we do want to be, pulling sort of granular level data for faculties and whatnot, like Wendy has done, we can't rely on just those high level pulls that are like available through SciVal. Like I know that Elsevier would probably point to SciVal, but then what happens to those institutions that don't have access to a data set like that? Because they do have some of the SDGs in there as research areas, but that doesn't work for everyone, right? So I don't know if there's creative ways we can get around running those search strings. 10 pages is almost incomprehensible.
No, it was 100 pages.
Oh, 100 pages.
And if you were to put the query into a Word document, he said it's over 100 pages long for SDG 3 or 4 or whatever it was,
Probably 3.
And I mean, it's great that they've gone to the trouble to provide that level of detail so that the query is very precise. But I mean, it just means that it's a different query in 2021, and so you've got this very nice dashboard with great results for 2020, but then you won't be able to compare one year to the next because it's a different query.
Yeah, I mean, technically we could use the same, search strings if we want, and just change it, same search string year to year, and just change the staff list over time. That's one way we could do it. But that's not going to account for new research ideas and the whole idea of exploring out of the box ideas, right? Because it won't catch new terms. But one thing that I'm surprised that, and I haven't seen the new 2021 search string, but you know, the idea of weighting text would be a really good way for them to get around having to include all of these words. I mean, there's one thing to be inclusive, but there's another thing to really drill down to words that have more weight in the SDG. And it's kind of an idea that I've been toying with a little bit is, you know, why not weight the text? Why you can include a lot of words, but just really drill down and weight the ones that are the most important. It's just an idea, just because the more text that's included, you're right, the more articles are going to populate. I don't know how, if you're saying like the 100-page text analysis is not going to run in Scopus. I'll be surprised if that's the case, because that's kind of defeats the purpose of what they're doing. But yeah, I mean, weighting the text is an idea of how to get around, you know, just being very inclusive.
And one last question that just came in here, talking about the disambiguation of names. Were the AU ID fields from Scopus, that's the author identifier from Scopus, reliably disambiguated? And could you perhaps have used ORCID, they ask?
So for my analysis, I didn't use ORCID. We have a very small percentage of our engineering faculty who have ORCID IDs. We have about 96% of our faculty who have Scopus IDs and about 14% who have ORCID. So that wasn't a route for us to go. But the Scopus IDs, the disambiguation, I did 2 spot checks in the year previous to doing this analysis. And I went through each member, like each Scopus ID one by one. And we reached out to some of the staff members who had multiple Scopus IDs to combine them. At the same time that this was happening, we had a larger University of Waterloo project, which Laura can probably talk to more about, cleaning up our Scopus profiles as we were running the pure system. So there was a lot of back-end cleanup on the profiles happening, but understandably and highly likely that there are some that you know, got missed. And as the presentation was mentioning before, databases are always messy. So I'm sure that there were things that have happened since we did the analysis, but we kind of did that secret at the time.
Super. Well, thank you so much, Laura and Wendy, for this very visual, very beautiful visual take on the UN SDGs. And everyone, stay seated. Don't go anywhere, because we have a presentation by my colleague at McMaster University, Jack Young, who is going to be talking about a standardized bibliometric report that I have seen. He's using this in the Health Sciences Library, and it really makes the rollout and the communication of bibliometric, boring little bibliometric numbers, much more standardized and much more fluid. And so I think this is a very practical example of how you can actually use a report to communicate bibliometrics well. Take it away, Jack.
Thanks, Jeff. So today I'm gonna be talking about a pilot service that we launched at McMaster's Health Sciences Library that aim to create standardized bibliometric reports for targeted departments and research groups in an attempt to kind of build engagement and educational opportunities between the library and these sort of stakeholders within the Faculty of Health Sciences. So I'm hoping that today's presentation will be particularly relevant to organizations that might be in the early stages of setting up bibliometric services or looking for sort of collaborators. The idea was creating these sort of reports as a sort of carrot to get stakeholders kind of to engage with the library to deepen their discussions and understanding of bibliometrics and research impact. So just let me get it. So just to give you an overview of today's talk, I'm going to start off by giving you a bit of context about McMaster's Health Sciences Library. I'm going to then talk about our approach to generating these standardized reports, including how we chose which indicators to include. I'm then going to show you all a sample report so you have a sense of exactly what this document actually looks like. We'll talk about the results. And then finally, some next steps where we hope to go from here. So the Health Sciences Library, as Jeff mentioned, I work at McMaster with Jeff, but the Health Sciences Library is administratively separate from the other libraries on campus. So we have our own mandate, which is to support the education and research goals of the Faculty of Health Sciences. And we really have taken a bottom-up approach to bibliometrics and research impact within the library. So various departments and research groups have interest in bibliometrics, and they're using them to varying degrees. But there's certainly no sort of top-down mandate from the Faculty of Health Sciences to use metrics in a certain way. So what the library kind of sees this as is a potentially fruitful area for us to get into based on our expertise and our knowledge of some of the tools that are being used to do this work. And so the real focus initially was building up a strong foundation of knowledge and seeking out use cases within the faculty, kind of positioning ourselves as experts in this field and kind of willing collaborators if certain departments would like to sort of engage our services. So part of this, we added an Insight subscription to our existing Web of Science subscription. I think that was about 3 years ago, and really dug into the data that was available there. So Insights, of course, uses Web of Science data to provide some additional sort of types of metrics, things like normalized citation metrics, collaboration data, and that type of thing. So it kind of just lets you dig deeper into the Web of Science citation information. But what we found as we sort of brought our expertise around, so we participated in a number of sort of internal events on campus. We had like booths and posters. We presented at a number of like administrative meetings and things like that, kind of just talking about what the library was doing in this area. We found that there was kind of a high barrier to engagement with the work we were doing. And I think the big reason was that you really need to have a deep understanding of these indicators in order to know what types of questions they're good for answering. So a department or a research group may find what we're doing interesting, but they may not quite see exactly how it relates to the work that they're doing. And so what started to get in my head was we need to be creating sort of more targeted reports for these groups to try and start the conversation. They need to see some of their researchers' names in these reports to start to get sort of some motivation and maybe a clearer picture of, oh yeah, maybe this indicator would be useful to include in our annual report, for example, or a report to our donors to show what kind of impact our group has been making. One of the main tripping points here for our library is that we really had limited dedicated staff to pursue this work. I'm the point person for research metrics and bibliometrics within the Health Sciences Library, but it's not my full-time job. So I'm doing this sort of as a part-time piece of my larger role within the library. So how could we create these sort of more targeted reports with sort of limited human resource elements to actually carry them out? And that's where we got to our approach. And really what we kind of discovered as I worked more and more with metrics was that the name disambiguation piece, as was discussed briefly in the last presentation, is really a huge time suck. So because we were looking at department level or research group level, we couldn't use the McMaster affiliation search within a tool like Web of Science because we need to get more specific than that. So we need to actually have individual author lists that we could search. And the biggest time suck was disambiguating the names. The library didn't have the time to do that for each department. And we also didn't have the intimate knowledge of those departments to be able to tell if this J. Smith was different than this J. Smith. So we weren't confident that we could do that on our own. And this is where sort of a technological advance kind of helped us out. I think it was early last year, Web of Science introduced a new algorithmically generated author profile search. So if you go to their author search now and you enter your name, so if I enter Jack Young, I get 9 results. And essentially what that is Web of Science is suggesting that there's 9 distinct Jack Youngs who have publications within the database. It does this based on an algorithm, so it looks at where those authors have where those authors are affiliated with, the date range that they've published, as well as the journals they tend to publish in. So it's algorithmically generated, so it's not perfect, but it's rapid, it's quick. It kind of solved our problem of name disambiguation if we could accept the fact that these profiles would not be 100% perfect. But because our goal here was to start a conversation and to engage some of these groups, we decided that we could be comfortable with these imperfect data sets, as long as we were transparent about how they were being generated. And if they ended up helping us reach our goal of starting these conversations with the departments, we thought that it was worth it. So what we did was we used those Web of Science author profiles. We searched a list of provided names from any departments or research groups that were interested in engaging this pilot service. We limited it to 50 names from each group. So we weren't doing whole departments at this point. It was more of a test case. So we said, don't give us any more than 50. And we trusted the algorithmically generated profiles. We built up the data sets within Web of Science and then created custom data sets that we brought into Insights to analyze and run metrics on some predetermined indicators, and create some predetermined visualizations within Insights as well. We then took these data and visualizations and packaged them in a pre-built reporting template that we made in Excel. So not only did we standardize the report, but we standardized our methodology for producing the report, which greatly affected our ability to do this work efficiently, because essentially I could hand this sort of workflow to any of my fellow librarians and they could run a report that would look pretty much identical to the one that I could run independently. And we actually tested this out with a colleague of mine. So it increased our ability to actually generate these pretty in-depth reports relatively quickly. The final step in our approach was to meet with the submitting departments to go through the report and explain all the indicators used. So this was really what the big goal was here, was to actually spend some time one-on-one with these groups discussing this report in context with their researchers' names on it, and to kind of get the sense of where they're hoping to take this data next, kind of thing. So that was a requirement of engaging with the service. You had to meet with us to kind of go through the report together. So when it came to choosing indicators, we wanted to include a representative range of the indicators that are available within Insights. So we looked at aggregate, percentage-based, and normalized indicators. Aggregate being things like just counts, total publications, total citations. These were the indicators that the department and the faculties were most familiar with, most comfortable with. I should mention that working in the health sciences, there is already a degree of familiarity and comfort with tracking citations and viewing citations as an indicator of impact. So we didn't really have that hurdle to get over with a lot of these groups. They were already sort of conscious of citations, and sort of interested in learning more. And to do that, the next step was to kind of bring in these percentage-based indicators. So we looked at things like the percentage of publications that were in the top quartile for journal impact factor, augmenting a little bit the standard reporting of just journal impact factor. We know the issues behind that. We know that our departments, though, were interested that their researchers were publishing in these high impact journals. So we tried to augment it a little bit by looking at the quartiles, basically the percentiles rankings of journal impact factor, so that at least we could get a little bit of normalization for the research area. We also included the percentage of international and industry collaborations. And then when we got to our normalized indicators, which are kind of the bread and butter of Insights, we were able to look at citation counts that had been normalized based on the year of publication, the research area, and the publication type. So we could look at the percentage of an author's publications or the group's publications that were in the 99th percentile for citation count, for example, or the 90th percentile, the top 10%, or what the average paper coming out of that group, where it landed in citation percentile. So we knew this was a sort of a wide slate of indicators to be providing, and we knew that some of them were more complex than others. But again, because this was meant to be a sort of educational tool, as well as a reporting tool, we wanted to sort of build up with some more familiar indicators into a bit more complex, and then up into sort of the most maybe dense, methodologically speaking, indicators that are out there. Give them a full scope, let them pick and choose what they, or let them get a real sense of what stories you could tell with these types of this type of data. Okay, so now I'm going to actually just show you a sample report to get a sense of exactly what it looked like. So we broke it down into 5 sections. We had an introduction, a methodology, the data itself, those visualizations that I talked about, as well as an article list. So the introduction was really meant to provide context for the work. The bolded paragraph here was actually bolded in the report and actually placed in a couple of different key spots around the report, because we really wanted to be clear that this is just one way of considering impact. This report is focused exclusively on research in academic journals and citation and publication counts specifically. And this is only one lens through which to view impact. So starting off with that line, and when we met with the departments, starting off by really making that piece clear, I think was really important to us, because the responsible use of metrics is at the front of our mind when we're working with these groups. And that carries through to the methodology, which is the second section of the report. Here we report as transparently as possible exactly how we generated this data. So that includes the data source, any limits that we put on that search, the date range, of course, and then most importantly, I think, is how those publication lists were generated, because again, we're using the algorithmically generated author profiles. So we make that very clear. We explain what that means, and we recommend that when they're looking at this data, if they're trying to give it any sort of, if they're trying to do any sort of analysis of this data, they should be doing some comparison with individual CVs to make sure that these profiles are not way off base. And then finally, if they'd like to learn more about improving the accuracy, that they can contact myself, and we can work on something there. So I'll touch on that a bit further as we get to the next steps. So then we get into the data section itself. So we have each of those indicators listed, presented in a table, both for each individual author as well as the aggregate for the group as a whole. We made this a sortable table, which again helped us when we were talking with these groups, explain that there's not one indicator here that can tell an entire story. If you resort any of these columns, a different author will jump to the top. And so it's all about understanding these numbers in context and understanding what they can tell you and what they can't. We then got into the visualizations. These are just canned visualizations that you can generate very quickly within the Insights tool. The analysis here, we looked only at the group total, so the aggregate work of the group as a whole. We looked at total publications on a 5-year trend, citations per publication on a 5-year trend. We also looked at the collaborators' total publications by collaborator within the group, so who the group is collaborating most often with, as well as where the authors, where the group is publishing most often, which journals. So again, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the types of visualizations we can produce, but we just want to give them kind of a representative sample of what was available. And then the final section was the actual publication list. This was all of the articles that were included in the analysis. This was really easy because you can pull the whole thing right out of Insights. It comes into Excel looking like this. Basically, we just turned it into a sortable table. So if if these departments were so inclined, they could get down to a very granular level and look at the individual articles that had the biggest impact. So for example, they could resort by percentile and subject area to see which articles in particular were outperforming their peers at the highest rate when it comes to citation counts. So what were the results of this pilot service? So we introduced the service. The first presentation we had on it was in October of 2020, and we've produced reports for 6 departments within the faculty since then. I would say the follow-up meetings were extremely successful. We kind of anticipated we might only be meeting with sort of the research administrators with these groups, but many times we were actually having sort of high-level researchers actually coming to these meetings. We had department heads coming to these meetings, and they were all very interested and engaged in this work. They had a lot of really good questions and were showing a lot of enthusiasm about, you know, how we can keep working in this area moving forward. 3 questions that did come up kind of repeatedly were the customizability of these reports. So, you know, can we change the date range? Can we look at a subset of a department? So can we regroup these authors and look at subsets? The frequency of the reporting, how often they can come to the library asking for this type of information, which was flattering, but also a little bit, you know, it made you think, okay, we don't want to bite off more than we can chew here. As well as additional indicators. So there was interest in a couple of groups about tracking the number of primary authors or first authors on publications. So all those questions kind of have led us to our next steps, which actually is circling all the way back to what I talked about at the beginning, which is the name disambiguation process. We've actually started in these meetings, started using the standardized report as a launching pad to talk about the importance of author identifiers. We've been working with author identifiers in the library for the past 3 years, let's say. We've been running, getting started with ORCID workshops, showing people how to build up their profiles. And those have been sporadically attended. They're not, you might have some small pockets of researchers that are quite interested, but because there's no sort of mandate coming from anywhere, it's really just based on personal interest in this kind of thing. But